So the Supreme Court will consider the next big Second Amendment case, and once again it deals with state concealed carry restrictions and laws passed in direct defiance to their prior 6-3 ruling in Bruin. And now the Trump DOJ has stepped up, they've stepped into this case, and they will support striking these laws down during the upcoming oral arguments. This is great news, so let's talk about what is happening in this critical case. Now, before we jump into this video, if you guys want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to subscribe. And I also want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to self-defense protection, in my mind, AOR is in a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, and they're always expanding upon their benefits to give you the best for your membership. Now, also one of the cool things that they did and they added in is they're guaranteeing 4 attorneys for your self-defense case, which is something that no other company offers. So if you're interested, check them out using the links down below. And if you use my code ARMEDSCHOLAR, you can get $25 off of your sign-up fee. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be talking about a two-way case that is set to be decided by the Supreme Court this term. And once again, it deals with state concealed carry restrictions and laws passed in direct defiance to what the Supreme Court said in Bruin. The case we're going to be talking about in this video is called Wohlford versus Lopez. Recently, to the surprise of many, the Trump DOJ and AG Bondi actually stepped up in this case, and they supported this challenge and they supported striking down these state concealed carry restrictions. That may have also ultimately actually helped the Supreme Court to break their track record of denying all of these emergency cases, because this was still an interlocutory case. It was not a final merits decision at this point. But the Trump DOJ, through their amicus brief, probably actually helped the Supreme Court to take review of this case. And once again, the Trump DOJ is stepping up in support of this case. Recently, the Trump DOJ asked the Supreme Court to join those oral arguments that are going to happen on January 20th. They want to participate in those. And we just got the answer from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has granted the Trump administration the ability to participate in those oral arguments that are going to take place at the end of this month on January 20th. This is great news that we have the administration on our side during those oral arguments and can potentially assist us in getting the Supreme Court to rule in a way that we want. Now, if you're not aware, the Wohlford case is a challenge to Hawaii's new laws on concealed carry passed in response to Bruin. This law, like others, tried to add more restrictions to concealed carry and create this default rule where individuals can conceal carry, have their carry permits, and carry those firearms on private property open to the public only if the owner of the property gives you express permission to do so. And they can do that by either posting a sign or maybe verbally saying, yes, you can carry at this location. Plaintiffs sued the state of Hawaii based on this law, and they sought to strike it down. And ultimately, they received a temporary kind of preliminary injunction. It was a TRO originally, converted into a preliminary injunction, which blocked the law from going into effect. However, of course, Hawaii did not like that, so they appealed up to the Ninth Circuit. And the Ninth Circuit, on review, ruled in favor of the state of Hawaii. And ultimately, that has now led this case to seek emergency Supreme Court intervention. And like I mentioned, the Supreme Court kind of broke their track record and granted review to this case, even though it's on an emergency basis. It's dealing with an interlocutory issue of a preliminary injunction, and they've granted review to this case. Briefs are being submitted, and now they're going to hold oral arguments in this case on January 20th. The question the Supreme Court will answer in this case is whether the Ninth Circuit erred in holding in direct conflict with the Second Circuit that Hawaii may presumptively prohibit the carry of handguns by licensed concealed carry permit holders on private property open to the public unless the property owner affirmatively gives express permission to the handgun carrier. That means that the Supreme Court will directly address this whole catch-all property ban that was passed in the state of Hawaii in direct response and defiance of Bruin, and it will also impact all the other state laws that have done similar things. Now, one of the critical things that may have led the Supreme Court to take this case on review was that prior DOJ brief. And once again, the Trump DOJ is jumping in support of this two-way effort. They recently submitted an amicus brief arguing that the ultimate decision of the court should be to strike down this whole catch-all property ban. And first thing they kind of argued is that Hawaii's whole affirmative consent rule violated the Second Amendment because it was designed purely to suppress concealed carry within the state. The Trump DOJ argues that the law here in question was not aiming to abide by Bruin or Supreme Court precedent. Instead, it has the hidden agenda of simply frustrating two-way rights. They argue that Hawaii already has protections for property rights of the owners there in Hawaii under some traditional trespass laws, and the property owners could always and pretty much forever have been able to forbid firearms simply by posting a sign saying something like "no guns allowed." But this default ban that was put in place in Hawaii was not about protecting property rights of those owners in Hawaii. Instead, it is all about actually making public carry practically impossible in direct defiance to Bruin. The whole goal of this was to expand upon gun-free zones and make almost everywhere within the state a gun-free zone. In the brief, the Trump administration argued that this case presents the question whether the Second Amendment allows a state to make it unlawful for concealed carry license holders to carry firearms on private property open to the public without the property owner's express authorization. The United States, they argue, has a substantial interest in the preservation of the right to keep and bear arms and in the proper interpretation of the Second Amendment. The United States previously presented oral arguments as amicus in other Second Amendment cases, and the United States' participation in oral arguments in this case could materially assist the court in its consideration of this case. Now, after the Trump DOJ filed their brief, I anticipated that they would ask to participate during the oral arguments on January 20th on behalf of the Pro-2A side, assisting us in those arguments, and that's exactly what has happened. And now the Supreme Court has given the answer, and they have in fact granted the Trump administration the ability to participate in these oral arguments. So this is great news, and it will likely be beneficial to have the administration on our side during these arguments. It could also help to sway maybe some of those Supreme Court justices who are maybe wanting to rule in a pro-2A way, and maybe even sway some of those other ones who are on the fence. When you have the administration on your side supporting your position, it's always a good sign. And so that could actually help us in this case. Now, also in this case, you have 26 states who have filed an amicus brief in support of also striking down the Hawaii concealed carry restrictions. But on the other side, you have 18 states who have filed a brief in support of Hawaii's position. Also recently, you had Hawaii who filed their response to the Supreme Court, and they argue that this law requiring consent before someone carries a firearm onto private property is fully consistent with the Second Amendment. And they believe that because the Constitution has never protected a right to armed entry without a property owner's permission. At least that's according to what Hawaii is arguing. The brief emphasized that since the founding era, the right to exclude has been a core feature of property ownership, and they believe nothing in the Second Amendment overrides that principle. In Hawaii's view, they believe that this law does not ban carry. Instead, it simply requires permission, which can be given verbally in writing or maybe via a sign. They argue that the founding era understanding around this area of law was that you did not have an absolute right to carry guns onto someone else's land or property without their consent, and because of that, they believe this law in Hawaii does not violate the Second Amendment. So this is huge for the Second Amendment movement. This term, the Supreme Court will once again hear a critical Second Amendment case and rule once again on concealed carry restrictions. And the good thing, like I mentioned, is that we now have confirmation that the Trump administration is on our side and that they will participate during the oral arguments. They will argue in a pro-2A way to the Supreme Court. And again, all of that's going to happen on January 20th. So this is great news, and it will likely help to push this case to a positive Second Amendment ruling. So that's what's currently happening in this critical concealed carry case. We're now just a couple weeks away from those oral arguments, from some landmark arguments that are probably going to help to reshape the Second Amendment landscape. And I'm very curious to see what happens during those oral arguments. So as we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.